Have you ever noticed how a problem can grow just because your mind keeps staring at it? Nothing changes, but inside you, it gets heavier. You replay it, complain about it, analyze it from every angle, wait for the perfect moment, and somehow the problem starts taking up more space than your actual life. That is where things begin to go wrong, because the longer your attention stays trapped in what is painful, unfair, or unfinished, the harder it becomes to see what could actually move you forward. And this is exactly where Stoicism becomes so useful. It brings you back to something simple and strong. Your life starts changing the moment you stop feeding the problem with endless mental energy and start asking what can be done now. That shift changes everything. You stop letting emotion make all your decisions. You stop handing your power to delay, fear, and overthinking. You stop waiting for life to feel easier before you begin acting like someone who is taking it seriously. And that is where this episode begins. Take full responsibility for what happens from now on. This is not always easy to hear, especially when life has been unfair. There are things that happen to you that you did not choose. There are people who made things harder. There are moments that left damage, confusion, anger, or pain behind. None of that should be denied. But there comes a point where healing and progress ask something difficult from you. They ask you to stop building your future around what already happened and start taking responsibility for what you do next. That is where real change begins. Not when the past finally feels justified, not when everyone suddenly understands your pain, not when circumstances become perfect. Change begins the moment you quietly decide, from here forward, my life is in my hands. That decision has power in it, because the moment you take responsibility, your energy comes back to you. You stop spending so much of your strength asking why this happened, why they did what they did, why things turned out this way. Those questions can keep the mind trapped for years if you let them. Responsibility interrupts that trap. It says, maybe I did not choose everything that brought me here, but I can choose what I build from here. That is a completely different posture. Now you are no longer waiting for the past to release you. You are no longer placing your future in the hands of people who already failed you, misunderstood you, or could not give you what you needed. You begin standing on something firmer: your choices, your habits, your discipline, your response. Stoicism respects that kind of strength. It does not waste time teaching you how to complain beautifully. It teaches you how to recover your inner authority. It asks you to look at your life with honesty and say, what is mine to carry now? What is mine to correct now? What is mine to build now? That is the mindset that creates movement. Responsibility is not self-hatred. It is not blaming yourself for every wound. It is not pretending the past did not matter. It is simply refusing to stay emotionally tied to the idea that your life cannot improve until someone else changes, apologizes, returns, or finally makes things right. That kind of waiting steals years. Real progress starts when you stop saying, "This is why I'm stuck," and start asking, "What can I do with my life from this point forward?" That question is cleaner, stronger. It opens the door to action, and action is what breaks stagnation. So this first point is where the whole episode stands. If you want a more solution-focused life, you have to begin here. Take full responsibility for what happens from now on. Let the past teach you, but do not let it govern you. Let other people reveal themselves, but do not let their failures become your permanent identity. Because the moment you stop handing away authorship over your life is the moment progress becomes possible. Train your focus to go where progress can grow. Your life follows your focus more than you think. Whatever your mind keeps returning to starts shaping your emotional world. If your attention stays fixed on what is broken, unfair, missing or painful, then even when nothing is happening outside you, something heavy keeps happening inside you. The mind keeps feeding the same area, and after a while it starts to feel like that area is your whole life. That is why focus matters so much. Not because you should pretend problems do not exist, but because attention is fuel. And whatever you keep fueling begins to dominate your inner world. If you keep feeding confusion, confusion grows. If you keep feeding resentment, resentment deepens. If you keep feeding the same mental replay, the problem starts feeling larger than it actually is. This is where progress asks for discipline. You have to learn how to guide your attention instead of letting your attention run wherever pain pulls it. That does not mean denial. It means direction. It means asking yourself whether your focus is helping you understand the situation clearly or just keeping you emotionally trapped inside it. That question can change a lot, because once you notice that your attention has been circling the same wound, the same frustration, or the same fear, you can interrupt it. You can begin moving your focus towards something more useful. Clarity, a plan, a next step, a practical action, a conversation that needs to happen, a habit that needs to change, something real. Something that can actually create movement. This is what Stoicism keeps trying to teach you. Your mind should not be left unmanaged. If you let it dwell too long in what is wrong, it will build a home there. But if you train it to return to what is useful, what is possible, and what is still within your power, then your inner world begins to organize itself differently. And when that happens, life starts feeling different too. You are not as scattered. You are not as emotionally flooded. You stop giving the same problem unlimited space inside your day. Instead, you begin asking better questions. What deserves my energy right now? What part of this can actually be improved? Where should my attention go if I want movement instead of mental exhaustion? That is how focus becomes a tool instead of a trap. You do not solve everything at once. You simply stop pouring your mind into places where nothing can grow. You begin placing your attention where progress has a chance. That might mean one decision, one action, one boundary, one clear thought, 1 hour of honest work. Small things matter here because focus, when used well, builds momentum quietly. And momentum changes the emotional climate of your life. So this point is simple, but it is not small. Train your focus carefully. Do not let it keep living where only frustration survives. Bring it back to what is useful, direct, and alive. Bring it back to what you can shape. Because progress rarely begins when your attention is trapped in the problem. It begins when your attention starts serving the solution. Act before fear makes the problem. Feel too big. Fear grows in stillness, not the kind of stillness that brings peace, but the kind where nothing is being done and the mind is left alone with the problem for too long. That is when things start expanding beyond their real size. What was difficult begins to feel impossible. What was uncomfortable starts looking dangerous. What needed one clear step suddenly feels like a mountain. You can feel this happening in real time. The longer you wait, the more the mind starts adding weight. It imagines failure before action. It predicts pain before effort. It turns one unresolved issue into 10 future disasters. And after a while, you are no longer dealing with the original problem. You are dealing with the story fear built around it. That is why action matters so early. Not because you need a perfect plan, and not because every problem can be solved immediately. Action matters because it interrupts exaggeration. It gives the mind something real to stand on. The moment you move, even in a small way, the problem stops living only in imagination and starts entering the world of reality, where it can finally be handled. That changes your relationship with it. A difficult conversation feels terrifying before it happens. A task feels heavier before you begin. A decision feels more threatening when it is only circling in your head. But once you take one honest step, the spell starts breaking. You see what is actually there, not just what fear kept predicting. This is one of the quiet strengths of Stoicism. It does not let the mind sit too long in helpless drama. It keeps bringing you back to movement, not rushed movement, not panicked movement, useful movement. That might be one email, one phone call, one written plan, one boundary, one difficult sentence you finally say out loud. Small action is still action, and small action does something powerful. It reminds you that you are not powerless in the way fear wanted you to believe. That is often the turning point, because once movement begins, momentum becomes possible. The problem may still be there. It may still require effort, patience, and discomfort. But it no longer owns the whole emotional space the way it did when you were only staring at it. So this point is not telling you to become reckless. It is telling you not to let delay become fuel for fear. Move before the mind turns hesitation into a permanent atmosphere. Move while the next step is still clear enough to take. Because a lot of problems become enormous only after fear has been given too much time to decorate them. And once you act, even imperfectly, you often find that what looked overwhelming from a distance becomes far more manageable up close. Take full ownership of how you react to setbacks. Setbacks are going to happen. That part is not the surprise. The surprise is how much of the damage often comes from the reaction, not the setback itself. A delay can stay a delay, or it can become discouragement that poisons the rest of your week. A mistake can stay a mistake, or it can turn into self-doubt, anger, and emotional noise that makes the next step harder than it needed to be. The event matters, of course, but what you do internally after the event matters just as much. That is where your strength is revealed, because you do not control whether life interrupts your plans. You do not control whether people disappoint you, whether timing shifts, or whether something you worked for takes longer than expected. But you do have a say in whether the setback becomes a teacher or a trap. That difference lives in your response. If your first reaction is panic, then your thinking gets smaller. If your first reaction is bitterness, then your energy starts turning backward instead of forward. If your first reaction is, "This ruined everything," then the mind quickly begins building a much darker story than reality actually gave you. And that story is what deepens the struggle. Stoicism keeps bringing you back to this truth. What happened is one thing, but what you add to it is another. The setback may be real, but your reaction can either multiply it or contain it. It can either turn the moment into wasted suffering or turn it into information that helps you move with more wisdom. That is why ownership matters here. Ownership means you stop saying, "This setback made me fall apart," and start asking, "What did I do with this moment once it arrived?" That question is stronger. It gives you your role back. It reminds you that even when you do not control the event, you still participate in what the event becomes inside your life. And once you start seeing setbacks that way, something changes. You stop treating every interruption like a final judgment on your path. You stop assuming that a hard moment means the whole direction is wrong. You begin looking more carefully. What does this require now? Patience, adjustment, humility, a different approach. More steadiness. Sometimes the setback is not there to stop you. Sometimes it is there to refine you. That does not make it pleasant. It just makes it useful. And useful pain is easier to carry than meaningless drama. So this point asks you to become very honest in hard moments. When something goes wrong, before you feed it with more frustration, ask yourself, what kind of response would actually help? Not what your emotion wants to do first, but what your future would thank you for. Because setbacks are part of life. But whether they turn into collapse or into growth often depends on how fully you take ownership of your response. Catch the moment your thinking starts going in circles. One of the hardest things about overthinking is that it can feel useful while it is wasting your energy. It gives the impression that you are working on the problem. You replay it, analyze it, turn it around, revisit every detail, imagine every possible outcome, and for a while it feels as if you are being careful. But if nothing new is being seen and nothing real is being done, then it is not clarity anymore. It is a loop. And loops are dangerous because they drain you without moving you. You stay mentally busy but emotionally stuck. You keep returning to the same thought, the same fear, the same unfinished conversation in your head. After a while, your mind is no longer trying to solve the issue. It is only circling it. That is why overthinking can leave you exhausted even when you have done nothing outwardly demanding. This is where self-awareness becomes important. You need to catch the moment when thinking stops being productive and starts becoming repetitive. That moment matters because if you do not interrupt it early, the mind keeps feeding itself. It starts confusing repetition with depth. It starts believing that because a thought keeps coming back, it must deserve more attention. But that is not always true. Sometimes the mind is not asking for more analysis. Sometimes it is asking for a decision. Sometimes it is asking for one small action. Sometimes it is asking you to let go of what cannot be solved from inside your head alone. That is why this point is so practical. You have to learn how to notice the signs. The same question returning with no new insight. The same emotional tension replaying without movement. The same inner conversation pulling you in circles while your body gets tired and your clarity gets weaker. That is the loop. And once you see it, do not keep feeding it. Pause and ask a better question. Is there something useful I can do right now, or am I just mentally rehearsing pain? That question cuts through a lot of noise. If there is an action, take it. If there is no action, step out of the loop. Write the thought down. Take a walk. Breathe. Return to the facts. Move your attention somewhere real. The goal is not to shut your mind down. The goal is to stop letting it trap you in fake productivity. Because overthinking often looks like effort, but it usually leaves you with less power, not more. It keeps your mind busy while your life stays still. And the longer that continues, the harder it becomes to trust yourself. So this point asks for discipline in a quiet form. Learn the difference between reflection and repetition. Learn when thought is helping and when it is only circling the same drain. Catch the loop early, before it takes the whole day with it, because growth begins the moment you stop calling mental spinning progress and start returning your energy to what can actually move your life forward. Create space to think. Instead of rushing into panic, panic shortens your mind. The moment it takes over, everything starts feeling urgent. You want to answer immediately, fix everything at once, make the discomfort stop, get certainty now. And because that pressure feels so intense, it becomes very easy to mistake speed for intelligence. But speed is not always wisdom. A rushed mind usually grabs at the first emotional solution it can find. It speaks too early, decides too fast, assumes too much, and often creates a second problem while trying to escape the first one. That is why panic is so costly. It does not just make you feel bad, it distorts the quality of your choices. This is where space becomes necessary. You need room between what happens and what you do next. Not because delay always solves things, but because clarity needs air. If you react while your nervous system is still flooding the moment with fear, your response will usually reflect that fear. It may feel decisive, but later you often realize it was only a fast reaction wearing the clothes of action. Creating space breaks that pattern. Sometimes that space is only a few breaths. Sometimes it is 10 minutes away from the phone. Sometimes it is one night before answering, one walk before deciding, one honest pause before speaking. The form can change, but the principle stays the same. You are giving your mind the chance to come back online before you let it lead. That changes everything. Because when panic starts dropping, perspective begins returning. What looked impossible starts becoming specific. What felt like an emergency starts separating into parts. You stop reacting to the emotional volume of the moment and start seeing what is actually in front of you. That is a very different place to choose from. Stoicism depends on that kind of pause. It does not ask you to become slow for the sake of looking wise. It asks you to stop letting agitation choose your next move. A clear mind can still act quickly when needed, but it does not act from inner chaos. It acts from contact with reality. That is the difference you want. So this point is deeply practical. When you feel that internal rush, do not trust it too quickly. Notice what your body is doing. Notice how badly the mind wants immediate relief. Then create just enough distance for thought to return. Ask yourself what is actually happening, what really needs to be done, and what can wait until your state is steadier. Because many bad decisions are not made because the person lacked intelligence. They were made because panic got there first. Ask yourself what would actually help right now. This question can save you from a lot of wasted energy. When the mind gets emotional, it usually moves toward drama first. It wants to replay, complain, predict, defend, or panic. It fills the moment with noise, and once that noise takes over, even a simple situation can start feeling complicated. That is why this question matters so much. It cuts through the noise and brings you back to something useful. What would actually help right now? Not what would feel satisfying for 10 seconds, not what your frustration wants to say, not what your fear keeps imagining. What would help? That question changes the direction of the mind. It pulls you out of reaction and brings you back to function. It asks you to stop feeding the emotional atmosphere and return to the practical reality of the moment. Sometimes the answer is small. Drink water. Step away. Make the call. Write the plan. Clarify the real issue. Say less. Rest. Begin. But even when the answer is simple, the effect is powerful because the mind is no longer circling the problem for emotional reasons. It is starting to move toward relief that is real. That is very different from mental noise. A lot of suffering gets extended because the mind keeps asking the wrong questions. Why is this happening? Why are they like this? Why does this always happen to me? Why can't things be easier? Those questions may feel natural, but they rarely move anything forward. This question does. It puts you back in contact with action, clarity, and responsibility. And that is where progress begins again. Stoicism keeps bringing you back to this kind of discipline, not because feelings do not matter, but because feelings become dangerous when they take over the entire decision-making process. A useful mind knows how to return to the present and ask what the moment actually needs, instead of drowning in what the moment feels like. That is strength. You do not need to solve your whole life in one sitting. You do not need a perfect answer to everything. Very often, you just need the next helpful move, the next honest step, the next thing that reduces confusion instead of increasing it. And once you take that step, something inside you usually settles, because helplessness grows when the mind is trapped in emotional fog. But the moment you ask what would actually help, you begin returning to ground. You remember that even in a hard moment, there is often still something useful you can do. That is enough to change the direction. So this point is worth practicing often, in stress, in conflict, in delay, in disappointment. Anytime the mind starts getting dramatic, pause and ask the question that brings you back to reality. What would actually help right now? Because a solution-focused life is built by people who know how to leave the noise and return to what works. Replace complaining with one simple action. Every day. Complaining can feel like movement when you are tired, frustrated, or disappointed. It gives the mind something to do with its discomfort. You talk about what is wrong, repeat what should have been different, and give the problem more emotional attention than it deserves. For a moment, that can feel relieving, but it does not build anything. That is the real issue. Complaining keeps your attention locked onto what is not working, while action starts creating a way out. Even a small action changes the emotional tone of the day. It reminds you that you are not only someone who feels the weight of the problem, you are also someone who can respond to it. That matters more than people think. One useful action may look insignificant at first. It might be sending the message you kept delaying, organizing one small part of your environment, writing down the plan instead of carrying it in your head, or taking one step toward fixing what you keep talking about. The action does not have to be dramatic. It just has to be real. Real action changes identity. It slowly teaches your mind, I do not just sit inside frustration, I move. That creates self-respect, not the loud kind. The quiet kind that builds when you stop asking life to change before you do something with the moment in front of you. This is why small action is so powerful. It breaks emotional stagnation. Complaining keeps you mentally attached to the same stuck place. A small, useful move begins shifting your energy toward progress. It may not solve everything today, but it changes your position. And once your position changes, momentum becomes possible. Stoicism respects that kind of movement. It does not ask you to waste your strength describing the problem endlessly. It asks you to use your energy in a way that creates order, direction, and steadiness. That does not mean you can never speak honestly about what is hard. Sometimes naming the difficulty is necessary. The problem begins when expression becomes a substitute for action. When the mind starts believing that repeating the struggle is the same thing as confronting it. It is not. So this point asks for something practical. Each day replace some amount of complaint with one simple action, one thing that helps, one thing that reduces confusion, one thing that moves life forward instead of feeding the same emotional atmosphere. That is how momentum is built, not always through giant breakthroughs, but through small acts of usefulness repeated often enough that your life slowly begins to organize itself around progress instead of frustration. And once that shift begins, even your problems start feeling different. Because now you are not only staring at them, you are doing something. Calm your emotions so your choices stay clear. A problem becomes heavier very quickly when emotion starts making the decisions. Not because emotion is bad, but because emotion changes the quality of how you see. Anger narrows things, fear exaggerates things, frustration speeds things up, discouragement makes everything look pointless. And once one of those states takes the lead, your choices start losing clarity. That is why calm matters so much. Calm is not just a pleasant feeling. It is a working condition for good judgment. Without it, the mind starts grabbing at the fastest answer, the loudest thought, or the most emotionally satisfying move. That may bring temporary relief, but it rarely brings the best result. A calm mind sees more accurately. It can separate what is urgent from what only feels urgent. It can tell the difference between a real problem and an emotional spike. It can pause long enough to notice whether the next move is actually useful or just emotionally tempting. That is a skill, and like any skill, it has to be trained. You do not wait until life becomes calm to learn it. You practice returning to calm while life is still noisy. You lower your voice when pressure rises. You slow your breathing before answering. You stop yourself from making major decisions in the hottest part of the feeling. You give your mind the chance to come back into alignment before you let it lead. That changes a lot. Because once calm returns, the problem usually looks different. Not always smaller, but clearer. And clarity is often what you were actually needing all along. This is one of the quiet strengths in Stoicism. It teaches that self-command is not about pretending not to feel. It is about refusing to let emotion become the only force shaping your next step. You can feel the frustration and still choose wisely. You can feel the fear and still remain measured. You can feel the disappointment and still move without making the moment darker than it needs to be. That is real discipline, and it protects your future. A lot of bad choices are not made because someone lacked intelligence. They were made because the person was emotionally flooded and moved too early. They let the feeling decide before the mind had fully returned. Calm prevents that. It gives your judgment a place to stand. So this point is simple, but it carries real weight. If you want solution-focused